All
All
right.
right. Well, welcome to the Parley, Real People, Real Talk. I want to thank you so much, Hock, for joining us today and giving me some of your time. I've been watching your material for some time now. I got to say, I'm very much a fan of what you do and your process. I know you have a huge diversity in the martial arts, and have been doing it for what 30 years now. More?
40, I guess, if you count
Wow.
Ed Parker Kempo Karate in the early 70s.
Oh man.
And I wasn't a kid. They in the way back then they didn't allow children to train, and
Really?
and schools were extremely rare. We're talking about 72, 73, and they painted about 5 or 6 feet up the glass windows of the front of the shopping center school, so children couldn't even look in.
Wow.
And that's, of course, the old days. Then I went into the Army from there.
And what was your position, or what was your job in the military? Were you infantry or
Military police, and I became an investigator after a period of time there. And, I was in the USA and also in South Korea.
wow? And how did you find the training when you started with the military? How much of a shock was that compared to what you were doing with the Kempo?
Well, when I entered the Parker Kempo world, it was just after the blood and guts time, when every workout they're supposed to be, and I know it's legendary, but I was very close to those guys because they were all there, the original Parker black belts, which, by the way, Dan Inosanto was one,
Yes.
and Larry Hartzell was one, and Paul Vunek was one. And at any rate, so they decided to go just a tad commercial, and they quit the bloodletting, and that's when I started. So I heard a lot of the stories, but it was still pretty rough and still pretty militant. And so the basic training, the Military Police Academy, I just kind of chugged through it, and I did very well. I won a big award for the time period, but I just took one day at a time. There'd be a gigantic obstacle course on the side of the road. We were marching by, and people would say, "Oh, look at that." One guy would say, "I'm scared to death of that." The other guy would say, "Oh, I can't wait to do that." And I would simply say, "Well, hell, I got to do that on Thursday." And that was just the way I chugged along with it. But, it was tough. They tried to take you to the extremes. Old school Army, old school military, the very end of the Vietnam era. So it was tough. And I think, fortunately, I forgot most of it.
Well, I'm glad you're here today. So explain to me a little bit about, or to the people listening, because like I said, you've trained many different arts. How did you discover these arts? What led you to look to the next one? What did you extract from it? How did you start to develop as a martial artist?
Well, in the Army, I missed a tremendous opportunity because I was in South Korea. And basically, you had a box in the Military Police Academy. They had a boxing program that was voluntary, but at the end of the academy graduation, as with the Texas Police Academy, you had a box for 2 minutes. It didn't matter what the other person's size was,
Wow.
and had a so-called survive it. It's like a test, So nowadays, you realize your backup is not coming. You could order a pizza and then ask for backup, and the pizza will come first, And but that was a standard that they tried to. You have to go toe to toe with someone for a certain amount of time, and sometimes the matchups were ridiculous. But matchups in real life are ridiculous,
Yes, 100%.
And so, of course, eventually that led to injury, and the military did away with that, and police academies did away with that. So there was hand to hand in the military. And it wasn't as extensive as it should be. And of course, there was ongoing training. I was very lucky. I was in a military detective division where there was a lot of interesting people, martial arts guys from all over, Chicago PD and whatever. And we had Wednesday workouts that was just what you would call in the old days police judo. And because there wasn't many names for things back then, 60s and 70s, everybody knew karate, kind of knew kind of stand-up jiu-jitsu, not what we have today. But police judo was a loose term used for defensive tactics. So we did police judo on Wednesdays. I got out of the Army. I started doing karate, always trying to seek that survival edge material that just never was around to the extent that I thought we needed it. And so I was constantly on the quest for, something that was very real and that had no pomp and circumstance, no outside stuff. And, I was just very filterish about it. And then, of course, in the 80s, one of our best karate guys from the school went to the Mecca, California, and began mysteriously training in this new collection of stuff. And so I'm always on the hunt for stuff that I knew would work. And he returns from the Inosanto Academy, and it's a brave new world. We're doing everything that at that time, was Silat, mostly Bursalot, but Silat, Bikini Tertia that turned into Lameko, the Master Chai Thai boxing, Jeet Kune Do, and then we hooked up with Paul Vunak, who was at that time Mr. Reality.
Yeah.
And so we hosted Paul. He's a handful, as you probably have heard through time. I love the guy. I wish him well.
Yeah.
But he was inspirational for a lot of people back then to do a lot of realistic stuff, And so frustrated by that reality edge that I knew existed from crime and police work, I was constantly unhappy, frustrated, and on the hunt for what the next best thing. What is the next best thing? And as time marched on, there really wasn't a next best thing. And so then I decided, well, I got to put something together myself, and that's how it all kind of started. There were some great things. I worked out with a South African commando, Ben Mangles, for a period of time. Very deadly stuff. It was usually hosted by a police department, and I'm saying, wow, this is pretty nasty stuff, right to the death, than what cops should be ordinarily dealing with. But I went to the Philippines, and I became, very close to the Presos brothers. And it just moved on from there to the point where I had collected perhaps too much stuff that needed to be cleaved down.
Yeah.
Which is what takes us back to the Jeet Kune Do concept. And
exactly.
and Bruce Lee affected us all, and the ideology of it all affected us all. And I that's it, man. That was the 10 Commandments. Cut away the excess, all like that. It was very inspirational to me in the 70s at that very important time.
I find that very interesting that you were consciously aware of what exactly was lacking because of your reference point. Not everybody sees real crime. Not everybody is aware of real crime. And I think when people do self-defense, but they have never really been attacked, they're just worrying about the attack, they don't have that same reference point to really understand how chaotic and violent an attacker can be. And so from your policing experience, you had that reference that would make you go and look for something more realistic. So that's a brave endeavor, because you don't know what you're getting into necessarily all the time when you start doing that kind of work. So all that experience, it's 1996 now. You've taken all this, and now you've created your force necessary. Speak to me about, to everybody listening, kind of how you mentioned briefly that you started putting it together because you've seen the lack of that realistic training. How did it evolve? How did it become the Force Necessary program?
I became involved, of course, with the Presos brothers, Ernesto and Remy. And at that particular time, talking about the early 90s, Ernesto Presos had a very diverse, obsessive program, and it was called Arnis de Mano. So anyway, I came back to America. Well, I was with Ernesto and his people for about 5 years, went to the Philippines. The end of the month, there was this big test. And Ernesto says, that's the first time I met Ernesto in person. I've been training one of his guys in Texas. And so but we were there in the Negros Island and in the Manila. And I get this guruship, this black belt from Ernesto. And so it was kind of a surprise, but I got it. And I'm with him for 5 years, pretty obsessive when I get into a system, you know. And plus, I have all those years with the Inasanto world behind me. So I had a big head start. And I was a Remy nut going to seminars of Remy Praces. So I start to tour a little bit. I get back, and people in America are hearing that, you know, if you do these 12 things, you can become this rank in an original lineage back to Manila program. And they said, what? You mean here's this piece of paper, and if I do these 12 things? I said, yeah, if you do these other 24 things well, you can get this rank. So I began to become popular because I could do this. And that's how I started to tour. I started doing seminars. People say, come in, do this. And it's the good old days when you could have a backyard workout group or a garage workout group or dream of having a school. Those days are gone now, you know, especially with COVID. Yeah. And the disappointment of it through the decades have just driven everybody down. But anyway, meanwhile, I'm still frustrated. I'm teaching this. It's fun. I like it. I have a blast. However, my real interest is something not like that, you know? And so then I slowly started to introduce a more core effort kind of approach. And that started to pick up. I would do a 2-day seminar, and I would do 1.5 days of the Filipino material, which is quite diverse. And then the second half of the day, I would do what I wanted to do with the knife course or unarmed or whatever. And as the years went by, we're getting 94, 95, 96. I wound up doing more of my stuff and less of the other stuff. And that's how it pretty much got started. And, you know, the name is very difficult. In the beginning, I tried to call it, you know, when necessary, force necessary. Because, hey, I was a detective most of my adult life. And I'm very concerned about moral, ethical, legal applications, you know, and it wasn't a big deal back then. You know, if you take a combatives course, you're breaking the guy's neck every time, you're ripping his eyeballs out. And, you know, no, that's not survival, you know, unless you're fighting Hannibal Lecter or Jack the Ripper, you know. So anyway, I began to, the name, when necessary, force necessary, too clunky, too long. So I just shortened it to force necessary. The motto being only use that force necessary for the situation, an old police adage, you know. And then there's a couple of lines I like to tell in a seminar about that. But one of them is, you know, there's don't be force unnecessary. And that is doing unnecessary artsy steps. Yes. That, you know, are just not necessary. But you saw Joe Cool did it. I want to be like Joe Cool. And so I want to, you know, do that. And that is one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of well, you say the UFC or MMA, because those guys are on the line doing what they can do, systems gone, raw, generic, successful moves, which are often very simple. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, they end in a sport-like manner, but I'm a big fan of that. Because it's even that one more step closer to what we're trying to do, you know. And so that's pretty much how it developed through the years. And I still have epiphanies constantly. I see a move, I'm working on something or trying to get a part of a book done or something. And I see the little unnecessariness, or why is that there? Why am I doing this way? And so it's a never ending battle to try to cleave out the unnecessary.
And that's exactly what I was going to ask you, is how it's evolved. So it's very important, like you say, always looking for that extra little bit that you can just trim away just to get to the point. What's your as somebody who's looking for these answers or these truths, what's your system or process in actually testing it, pressure testing it? Do you do it like, how is your breakdown? Do you do it one dynamic at a time? Do you have your nucleus drill that you want to work and slowly integrate one aspect that you're trying to involve to see if it changes the outcome of the drill? What's your process on establishing if it works or not?
Well, one of the semi jokes I say often, you know, is I have a 2-tier test. One of them is, have I seen it in the UFC? And second, should I even consider the UFC? in this process? Is it appropriate? Because it's a different enclosed world. And the mystery of the pressure test, is let's just break it down real quickly in two ways. You have tier 1 material, in which it's the enemy may be fully alert, and as I like to say, Bruce Lee on 3 cups of coffee. And then you have tier 2 material, when Bruce Lee is on no cups of coffee and is even sub coffee, because you've hit him in the head with a chair or something like this. And so things that get dismissed because it's not super pressure tested, you and me, fully alert and in great health, working something that doesn't seem to work. Let me hit you, with a telephone, an old telephone, or a lamp in the head, and then do it. We're in tier 1 world, pressure testing, in which something that looks like a somewhat complicated jujitsu move or whatever suddenly can work because A, he's hurt, disabled, or comes to you disabled and untrained and all these different things. And so there's an element of skill development that needs to be behind all these things. And just to, a lot of times, just let two knuckleheads crash into each other and try an arm bar or rear arm bar hammerlock or something when they're fully alert, and you can't crack them in the side of the neck with the edge of your hand. That's what makes it work. And that's one of the reasons why I liked old school Aikijitsu, which I did for years, was because you hit him first, symbolic of beating the snot out of them, and then did your jujitsu, And so that is something to consider in the process of pressure testing, as opposed to just have two muscle-bound knuckleheads collide and try to do a particular thing.
I guess it would have to be a balance, because I do like that physical resistance, and having my training partner give me a stimulus that makes me have to perform under pressure, not give it to me, make it easy. But like you say, you can only do certain things before it's people really get hurt. On the flip side of that, though, would you say, because this is my perception, but some of the more traditional martial artists, they would say, well, I would just kick you here, or I would just hit you there. But because they're not getting to do that, and they're not pressure testing, perhaps maybe their timing or efficiency in actually performing that lethal technique is not necessarily there. Would you say it would have to be a balance of both?
Oh, yeah, sure. And, just because you hit somebody, doesn't mean that they're going to be deflated, and some people it's all a wacky different thing depending on that person. And in real fights, the state of mind of both people, their athleticism. If you tried to do something that is successful on one person, it could be a martial artist, and you pick up a footy rugby player from Australia and try to do it to him, and this guy may have no martial art experience at all. He's just tough. Yeah. It's not just rugby, it's a footy rules in Australia. And these guys just bang for almost an hour nonstop, and they're incredible athletes with pain tolerance and various attributes that these numbing deals don't work. And of course, I've lived in this world where trying to arrest people, and you're constantly evaluating, okay, well, now that didn't work, and the police have to do tier 2 stuff first. When the tier 2 easygoing things don't work, at some point you got to jump up to the real serious MMA-ish, top level stuff. And this is, going in your head at all times, trying to figure out, okay, now I can do this. And so the police world is kind of the opposite of what many citizens have to face.
And with that being said, like when people thinking about self-defense or real world martial arts, I feel like not a lot of training with regards to distance management and using your verbal jiu-jitsu, if you will, or recognizing hand movements and stuff like that. I feel like not enough of that is taught. And for somebody who's been in law enforcement and military, I'm sure that's something you had to focus a lot on, because being aware of your potential your suspect or whoever you were talking to or whoever's around you. That was something that you had to have as a prerequisite before interacting or engaging a suspect.
Well, if I often say I'm retired, and the one of the reasons I'm retired is this martial business exploded, and it was insane for me to stay in this, job consuming, time consuming thing. But if I were hiring police officers now, one of the major attributes I would look for is how charming they are. And that is part of the discussion, the de-escalation, witty, charming person instead of a robot. We have a lot of robot characters in police work, and wow. that is not a good thing. You need to have a talkative, engaging person that is not reading the militant script. And I find this to be an important attribute in hiring people and in my life. And of course, as a detective, you have to get criminals to confess and witnesses to talk. And it's an important ability, And so that's a big deal. And another thing that always aggravates me is a lot of the martial arts people are touring, talking about pre-assault cues. This guy clenches his fist, he scrunches his eyes, and this is true. And by the way, this is not new. My first pre-assault list that I saw was given at the Military Police Academy in 1974. That's how old the pre-assault list is. But you'll have martial artists running around, even in the last 10 years or 15 years, almost pretending they invented that. Now, maybe they did in isolation, but as Dave Spalding, one of my favorite gun instructors, talks about, it's not new. It's just new to you.
Exactly.
And so the list has grown, and I have my Fighting Words book, in which I like for people to know the list. I've seen those things, the fist clenching down the side of the body and the body movements, and that's just good to know. But the big problem with citizens is criminals that have any savvy are good actors, and they give you none of that. They approach with a smile. Yeah. They have a trick, they have a con, they have a handshake, and so we're worried about self-defense. And there was a period of time where self-defense training, innocently, naively, was just about guys fighting in a bar. That was the whole thing. You're 17-year-old to 28-year-old guy fighting in a bar. They are even training films in bars. And this is all a big subliminal problem to me, because your next confrontation will be on a parking lot or, at a barbershop. And it's not just two drunk guys that are 24 years old picking a fight with each other. It's criminals and how they approach, what they do, what they say. And that seems to be less taught than the pre-assault crime material.
And that's a big problem, because most people, a lot of people don't realize they're in a threatening situation before it's too late. Therefore, they cannot act because they have no idea that they're in danger.
Yeah. Yeah. And their alert system is and that's a big deal too. I'm a big proponent on this 0 to 60 concept, and that is, perhaps not new anymore, but in the old days, how fast could your car go from 0 to 60 was a big deal. And when you start to engage in a problem, you could have a race car racing a Volkswagen. And if the Volkswagen has his foot on the pedal 60 miles an hour and the race car is 30 miles an hour, the Volkswagen beats the NASCAR car, and that 0 to 60, where your head is at when that criminal crosses the street with a big smile and a handshake, or runs up with a gun, or whatever. That's a big kickstart problem in your head. And the good news for police is you should, when you're ironing a uniform, about to put it on, a mindset subliminally begins, I'm going to work. And that doesn't mean you should walk around like you're being hunted by the enemy soldiers. But for regular people, you don't ordinarily have that preparation.
Now, Now, speak to me about fighting words. What compelled you to speak your truth and start conducting these written pieces and putting it out there for the public?
Well, first of all, it turns out through life, I'll be 70 soon, but it turns out through
Looking
life.
good.
Yeah, I work out all the time and so forth, but I'm a writer first and foremost, and I'm compelled to write. It's a torturous delight, to try to put together the best words at the best time, that motivates. And I like writing fiction. I have numerous books, westerns and police stories and stuff. But so, given the fact that I'm compelled to write, I am compelled to write about these particular subjects, and it's whatever people's passions are. It's a mystery. Why do you like to skydive or ski? This is just something that I like to do. I have always been interested since childhood, movies, books, television, about how to fight. For some reason, it's a compelling thing to me to see, okay, well, you have to know how to punch. You have to know how to throw those 3 punches right. And I said, I got to learn that. I have to learn that, And finally, I got myself in that position. I left New York on a motorcycle after graduating high school and tried to tour the country, dreamed of going to Australia. These are all in my nonfiction books. But I had an opportunity there. Kung Fu was on with David Carradine. How cool was that guy? Which was a Bruce Lee manifestation.
Yeah.
He didn't want to fight. In the end, he kicked ass, and you don't know, maybe I should do Kung Fu. You don't know what you should be doing. And so there was Ed Parker Kempo Karate School, where there's none of these around. There in the early 70s and the 60s, and I said, well, there's David Carradine's Kung Fu School, I've got to go, and I've never stopped since.
That's awesome. So through your training, through your exploration, what would you say were the biggest misconceptions you found with regards to weapons defense and fighting with weapons in play?
Well, sorry. The knife is a hideous weapon, and the stick, is questionable in terms of a lot of times. When we have what we call kill shot tournaments, which is basically crazy ass stick fighting. But with the kill shot, we try, if you get hit in the head 3 times in the helmet 3 times, you're probably out, And so we'll have a referee say, okay, you won that one, dude. And that kind of thing. And so a lot of times if your stick hand is wounded, we stop it. We take the stick out of the guy's hand because it's been appropriately. He's got padding on it, but it's appropriate. And now you're unarmed versus the stick attacker. And I'm fascinated by that because the unarmed guy at first thinks, "Oh crap, I don't have my stick," but they then unarmed grapple with the guy, tackle him or whatever, and sometimes the unarmed guy wins. Where with a knife, this is going to be extremely difficult, And so it's a tricky deal. And with a pistol, my gun course is strictly simulated ammunition. I don't teach any marksmanship whatsoever. It's people shooting other people, moving, thinking people trying to shoot other moving, thinking people in a variety of situations and places that are basically true. And that's a big shock for people who just shoot targets.
Yeah.
And I started to do this in the 90s. I used toys that are now used by the military to simulate shooting. But back, I was playing with toys in 1995, 1994. But I was able to prove to ourselves that a certain quick draw process would get interrupted by a bad guy if they were close. And during that fight, can you shoot them? And it's not, with a rubber gun that does nothing. You actually see where that goes. Oh, I missed him. Oh, I got him here. He's still fighting. Oh, I shot him in the throat. He's got 3 or 4 seconds and he's done. this type of experimentation. Well, now, that's commonplace. Everybody except the most diehard other people are messing around with simulated ammunition pistols. So that's a big revelation that ordinarily doesn't get discussed. Let's just take one quick example, about shooting in, out, and around cars. And so you go to the range and you jump out of a car and you shoot a bunch of paper targets, and then you run around with your machine gun around back and you're shooting again. You know what? If someone's shooting at you, you're probably already dead. And in interactive training, you suddenly realize, well, I can't open the door and start shooting. First of all, the reason you're shooting is he probably started shooting at you first. So it's a terrible situation. Yeah. And so that was a culture. That's a culture shock. I wish that everyone at a shooting course could do 3 hours of live fire, 4 hours of live fire, and 4 hours of interactive ammunition training with whatever you got at the time, because you can see that what you were doing on this one-way street doesn't work in the two-way street, and so that's a big weapons shock right there.
Yeah, well, my experience is limited, but I play I play the bad guy for like use of force and scenario training for for some law enforcement and armed guards. And when some of these guys, when they're new, like they got a great shot, like you say, they spend a lot of time at the range and they can shoot. But as me playing the bad guy, sometimes that adrenaline they can't even get the retention on the gun.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. And like you say, if you don't train for that against another person, it's like the equivalent of just punching a bag and then going to spar.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
It's a big difference. So when you were coming up, what did you find was the most difficult aspect in training for you? What elements of martial arts or gun or knife, what did you find to be the most challenging in your own personal development as you matured through the art?
Well, I would have to say, as with most people, is the getting into Filipino martial arts and then doing these drills. Some of them can be rather complicated. And of course, then not realizing where it fits, later on through the years, I decided that everything that you do, I don't care. We say the word punch and kick because it's simple, but whatever you do, you should have at least one support skill developing drill with it, at least one. 100%. And so that the person that's doing an arm drag or whatever, they should be doing a drill. Now, drills got a bad name, I guess about 15 years ago with the Brazilian guys. And it used to drive me crazy. Like, well, that's a dead drill. I remember one film of some famous guy giving a lecture about how basically Filipino martial arts are doing a bunch of dead drills. They're not live. They're not this. They're not that. And then he stops. He's in a boxing ring and he turns around and he says, okay, now we're going to do a drill. What the hell? You know what I mean? It's still a drill. And then when I decided to use the word exercise instead of drill, it kind of screwed up their minds, because fighters run. That's an exercise. They do chin-ups. That's an exercise. They do, sit-ups. If you call the drill an exercise, it kind of gets into their head and it positions exactly where a skill developing drill should be. It's in that column of exercises, and the competent person, the competent system is having everybody do everything and, developing isolation development, what you're trying to do, which is classic. And then, trying to get it into live fire, getting it into the pressure testing or the chaos. And the acceptance of, but some of the drills, require a little coordination, and they were totally different to me. And I did them mindlessly, and I didn't proportion where they fit into the big picture until many years later. And so I still believe that whatever one thing you're doing, hand, stick, knife, gun, it would be fabulous to have at very least one drill to enhance that particular skill.
Yeah, I think that's why Bruce Lee was so ahead of his time, because he was very much, into the development of attributes. Because it's true, you could a martial artist could have know all these techniques, but if he's a heavy set guy in a gi, and you have a young athletic person who has intent to hurt you, and you don't have that those attributes or that physicality, it's not going to be a very good day for you.
Well, one of the big mantras that I have used forever, just ask anybody that's ever attended or read anything, is the who, what, where, when, how, and why questions. That is my filter for everything. And that's how a police officer writes a crime report. A detective answers those questions further. A prosecutor really answers those questions, because you never know what crazy thing happens in court. And so in the subject, I mean, I even say who knife, why knife, where knife, who stick, what stick, what, and we spend a little time, and it helps define the morality, the ethical, the legal aspects of this. But in the who question, who are you really? And who do you really think you're going to be fighting? Are you going to, if you're in Thai boxing, you're going to fight a Thai boxer. And I always say, if you want to learn a new escape from something, bring somebody in from the street and try it on them. And they will do something that you never dreamed of,
100%.
And so what you're saying about size is a who question issue. I have some great friends who do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and they are enormous. They're kind of muscular, but they're huge. And basically, when they lay on top of you, just lay on top of you, you're pretty much done. And that is the attribute, that overwhelming size is an attribute for that person. And so to mistrain, and Dan Inosanto had a great line years ago in the 80s at a seminar that I was attending with him, which is always great. He's Elvis.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
And he said that in his high school days, he was running back, and he was plowing into people and so forth. And the coach said, Dan, why are you just evade? Why are you running into them? And he said, well, I want to be like my hero, blankety blank, who was a giant guy. And the coach said to him, Dan, you're not 6'5". Pick a smaller hero. And that's a great story. And it relates back to the who, what, where, when, how, and why questions, which not just involve fighting, but also involve life. You're going to buy a new house? Answer those questions. You're going to get married? Answer those questions. You get about 3 or 4 down, and you realize that you need to ask the first one again. And that's why it takes about 6 passes of that to decide, to make a decision or to do something. And so they have been a staple of mine forever in the development of these force necessary courses, and also anything that I do that is sort of Filipino. I have the Pacific Archipelago concepts system that I teach when asked, and I'm doing 2 big ones this year. And it's the fun stuff. It's stick versus knife, mano mano, kachikimbo. It's this combination at its root where everything begins to look the same.
That's a brilliant filter. That's a brilliant way to kind of decide that, because once you understand what your why is, and then the things involved, you can actually spend less time and get to your objective a lot quicker.
Like why is, why did you go there, and why are you still there?
Yeah, but,
if there's trouble starting,
But just asking one of those questions will lead you to the next one. I think that's a really good filter to have. So for anybody who's, getting into this, world of self-defense now, and they understand their why, maybe they've, had something that's affected them, that's leading them into this. How much is a person's psychological past or dramatization affect they receive information for the ability to defend themselves? How hard is it to deal with somebody who's already coming in with a dramatization, and they're looking to empower themselves and learn how to defend themselves?
I have this expression, what's your martial IQ? And what is your ability, your natural ability to take all this information in? And in the beginning, it's not much. And so it just takes time and education. And, to me, I'm a seminar person now. I have no school. I could never run a school now. I'm too busy doing so many different things. But I did once. From 1989 to about 96, I was trying to run classes, as well as the increased travel that was going on. In that time period, many people come and go. I had 2 major universities in my city, and it's a rare student that remains that they didn't, go to graduate school or have to take golf or something. But I had a whole group of people that stayed with me, and it's the staying with you. I teach police, and it's all over the world. And one of the first things I bring up is, are we going to do this regularly? Because if you just do this once a year, it's not going to work. We need to have every Wednesday, every second Wednesday of every month or something. Let's get together and roughhouse a bit. And, that's the only way this is going to stick in this perishable skill world. And so I've had all kinds of people in seminars, back to my original point, in seminars, people come to me with martial IQ to some good level. They're there, they want to be there, they want to see what I'm doing. But when you're running that class and someone walks in, they are alien to all this. As I used to recall, they didn't even want to be touched. Yeah. They grabbed, or something was to some people was like a shock. And if you have a sexual assault victim or whatever, it's a big problem for them. So I was asked years ago to do these series of rape clinics, and I brought with me two of my longtime student women. And it became immediately apparent to me that I was the wrong man, a guy, to be teaching this material. And I immediately turned it over to the two women who ran the program successfully for years, because it was scary for victims to overcome a lot, and then also to, develop this martial IQ. And a lot of them don't want to see, a guy grabbing them, touching them, doing all that stuff after what's happened to them. So it's a crapshoot when someone walks in, and fortunately for me, being just a seminar guy now, I don't have to deal with that. I'm always, almost always, with people with a background.
And what about? Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I said, so what about with regards to being an officer? I have many friends. I even had a couple clients that are in law enforcement, and I know that's a hard job. You have to be mentally strong for the stuff that you have to deal with and see. What about officers now who are assaulted or possibly get shot or something in the field? How do they recover now? How do they come back from that and regain confidence, or even just have the ability to not let that affect them in their own training?
Well, it's becoming, we are overwhelmed with PTSD material now, and but ignored is the other half of that. There's an acronym for it, but it's good. It's adversity, and people, grow from this. Some. So it depends on the personality and the person, whether they can, do they go down or do they go up? The military is full of this, and it's a mindset, unfortunately, that isn't really taught. And I was thinking the other day, in our so-called snowflake world, where in the military, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. When I was in the Army, we were all worthless. That expression is, you're all the same, you're all worthless. I was kicked in the head by a drill sergeant. People were beaten up. You want to go to the orderly room for something, they fucked with you. What are you doing here? And you just get this edge that, well, life sucks and it's cool. There's this expression in the military, enjoy the suck. And that means they're yelling at you, screaming at you ridiculously to test you and to give you some, and you should kind of enjoy that. It's a great story to tell later. Don't fold under that, and by God, don't smile like you are enjoying it, because it'll get worse. Yeah. But it's a mental attitude about survival, and that people have. And for me, I wanted adventure in life. I wanted adversity. I wanted all these different things, and it sucks. It's absolutely true. But it was just it's the psychology of the hero. And look what Achilles went through. Look what all these people went through since the dawn of storytelling. And I want to be that guy. I want to be, Kojak and all these people that have survived and crawled their way out of hell and all this stuff, And that's where the psychology of heroism and tales and mythology and Batman and everything comes from. And so it's easy to say that, and I'm sure I'm always compelled by the fact that Indiana Jones was a fantastic hero until he saw snakes, and everybody's got that.
Yeah.
Things that you can't overcome. You'll never be invincible. But the cop that you interview, and I'd like for him to be charming or her to be a charming person that could communicate very well. You try to, I would, and I've never been involved in hiring police, I would be also interested in examining these other issues because it may come to play later. I've had many friends quit because someone tried to pull their gun out of their holster, that have had nearly shot, and 1 month later they quit. And then there's another whole kind of cat that likes to sit around a bar and say, one time I was almost shot in the head and blah, blah, blah. I want to be that guy. I don't want to be the other guy.
So where do you think that this got lost in our society nowadays? Because it's definitely not, it's definitely changed. People are much more offended quickly, or they don't have that emotional resiliency, I think, in my perspective anyway. Some people won't agree, but that's just what I think. Why do you think this is such a big thing now, if you agree with me at all? But why do you think that kids or people have lost that kind of thick skin?
Well, I guess it has something to do with this falling back to storytelling, heroes when they're small, being overprotective parents. You always hear these stories. I grew up in New York City. I was gone in the summer from the morning till night. My parents didn't know, didn't care where I was, what I was doing. And now you have a play date with a friend or something. It's a very overprotective society. And I never, want to wish ill on anyone or call them a name or anything like this, and I always hope that every good person lives the best life that they have, that they can have. And I'm not one to treat people roughly. And that really comes from several sources, but one of them is John Wayne, who said, until he's wronged, he's super nice to everybody. He's played different characters through time, but that's the overall message.
Yeah.
And then once again, it's the heroism thing, that you get the model of the model life that you want to be and try to be. It's the age-old question. What would John Wayne do? What would Batman do at this time? What would Jesus do at this time? The what would. And, this is a model for life. And so I don't want to be a weakened little, easily disturbed person. That's why those drill sergeants yelled at me. I've been through that. You can't, and as a cop, you have to find enjoy the suck, find the humor in that. And I've been spit on. I remember one night we arrested a guy who was crazy, crashing cars into everything. He's in the back of our cage spitting on us. And so I'm driving and I looked at my partner and I said, ain't this something? Enjoy the suck,
Wow.
Just don't throw up back there because I got to clean it out, as opposed to pulling the car over, pulling the guy out in the street and beating the snot out of him,
Yeah.
But those were also different times. If I had a guy throw a punch at me, I didn't arrest him for assaulting a police officer. Ordinarily, he's just a college kid. He's drunk this night or whatever. I would arrest him for, disorderly conduct or something. Maybe I had to rough him up to arrest him. But today is just a different day. And so the public and the police just had a different kind of interaction that today is under the microscope.
And so for somebody, whether they're dealing at one extreme, like you say, being an officer, having somebody spit at you or attack you, or just an everyday person who's managing stress or bullying or something like this, how do you train and manage stress in order to focus on achieving your objective in that particular scenario?
I guess it's exposure, like any psychologist, and I'm not one, and I hate to speak like one, because I find many martial art instructors take that position that, they're the all-knowing psychologist, and I am not one. I can only send you to them and send you to the sources that are actually qualified. But the exposure, like if you're afraid of spiders, they put one across the room and then they bring it closer, then it crawls on your hand, and then it's up your arm. That slow introduction of what we would say fear management, which would lead to stress control. So everybody is so different and delicate in so many areas that I don't know that there's an open blanket that covers that. However, I do resort back to the Army days, which was my major college. Everything that could suck happened to me in the Army. That was my college of experience of life. Every crime, the shotgun guy who blew his brains out, the catching armed robbers, everything that the major categories of things you could do, I did in military police. And when I got out, that I had been exposed to so much, and it was a terrific experience. We pick on the Army for its easy basic training. Since the 80s, but yet they turned out some terrific people who've been in Iran, been in Iraq, been in Afghanistan, not Iran legally, but we say, they weren't tough on those guys. Hey, those guys did fine. And their torture and basic training wasn't the same torture that we had, but you really can't pick at them when you investigate everything that's happened these last few years. But everybody is operating in a different equilibrium in terms of stress, and I've been super stressed out, and so I can relate to doing stupid things. I can relate to that too, and it's a tricky day-to-day thing.
Is that why you would say it's so important for law enforcement or military to train these scenario type trainings in order to, like you say, introduce them slowly to that spider across the room? Start the scenario training where it's you start off with just it's a verbal thing, distance management, to potential use of force, to potential deployment of a weapon. Is that pretty much kind of the reason why they systematically do it that way, is to actually build up that threshold?
Yes, even if they don't realize it, it's just almost common sense. And so if you put, once again, we're back to the pressure test subject matter. And so the pressure test is more at the end. Or sometimes I do it in the beginning. Because here's the deal. If I have a certain stalking mad rush drill, and then I want to see what they do, because what they do in an untrained moment is what they will really do when it happens. And so that's my personal experiment. When I do these seminars, about 40% of it is an experiment in humanity. I put it out there and I watch them. And of course, that's what I get a kick out of and I enjoy. And then I can build on that. But I will say, what you just did, this first warm up, is probably what you would do when someone goes for your throat, runs across from stalking and runs in at you, And so that's like a pressure test in a way, but I don't, then we start solving the problem, and so the pressure test, a lot of systems is too soon. I always talk about the two, in high school, you grow up with a super athlete. He's the quarterback kid. He's 16. He's incredible. And or let's just say some other football person. And without skill development, that person will never get any better. They're just going to be kind of at this sub-super level, and they don't have the training. Just look at the training in football today. It's absolutely incredible. A college athlete is achieving the same skill set ratios as a pro athlete in football 10 or 15 years ago. And that's from excellent training methodology. And sometimes I'd like to say, if you're going to get a martial art training film, stop for a moment and maybe buy an American football training film and get into what they're doing, because they're isolating skill and improving things so well, and you can't do that pressure testing all the time. Yeah. Because it's not going to grow for you. You got to step back, put the spider across the room, let them see things and develop in those terrible dead drills that are so bad. Those are just stepping stones, man, to get up to a performance level. And so my hat is off to athletic training and watch what they're doing. And if you can't use that particular drill, think about how it might apply in the methodology of how you're developing people. Now, once again, I'm a seminar person. And I always say every seminar that your future is in the hands of your local instructor. He's the person you see all the time that is supposed to be doing all these things. Me, I'm a circus act. I pass through town, we do some tricks, and I move on to the next city.
I like that. I like that line. So keeping with this theme now, because I was going to ask this, but you already touched on it. How different is the training or teaching of different contents compared to others? For example, I find that like whenever I'm doing trapping drills, right? If I'm looking at Jeet Kune Do trapping drills or Wing Chun trapping drills or anything like that, sometimes the student or the person partaking is not really understanding why, especially if they're new in it. But the minute you put in an aluminum trainer, a knife trainer, all of a sudden it makes sense why they would move a certain way. Do you kind of mismatch ways of training certain things and find uses for them better used for different arts altogether?
Well, if you typical ad of mine is going to be, hand stick, knife, gun. I'm trying to get away from the word combatives. It's just me, because I think it's abused, overused word. If you're doing Tai Chi, you add an eye jab, it's suddenly Tai Chi combatives. And I tell my guys, we have instructors all over the world, and I tell them, you do whatever you need to do to survive. People used to say I was ahead of the curve in the 90s, but I don't know if trying to distance myself from the common term combatives. This is why I switched to close quarter concepts or Pacific archipelago concepts instead of combatives, because of this reason. And it's just me. I'll probably suffer for it in search terms and all like that. But my typical ad is hand, stick, knife, gun, and skill drills and exercises from the martial arts, or in particular, my favorites, the Pacific Island material, the Philippines, and all the stuff I've been in, Japan and Hawaii and Indonesia. So I do. You do the stuff with one guy has a knife. One of my earliest Jeet Kune Do classes, I was telling you about this guy that went to California, the Mecca, and we were doing this passing drill that's kind of famous, and he pulls out a real knife. And we're doing this motion in a line. He comes up and he feeds you that knife, and suddenly, whoa! So that's what this is for, And so it is the idea of using where I can all these skill drills and exercises that I learned from these other people, and poking them in to a simple combatives movement.
All right. Well, just so you know, my brand is actually called JKD Combative Sciences.
Oh, well, hey, do it, man. You have to.
That should not bother you.
You had. This is just me. I told you it's probably 100%. A huge mistake. It's probably a huge mistake, but it's just my thinking of trying to be different.
I don't disagree. It's very much like everybody puts the camel pants on, and it's all that term is used quite a bit. So for what is the most important thing someone can do, or what should they strive to look for when they're looking to actually become proficient in self-defense? Which aspects would you tell them this is going to give you the best bang for your buck when it comes to self-preservation? This is what you should invest in.
The number one, of course, get off the couch and do something. And almost anything is better than nothing. And I always got a kick out of the story of the guy had seen the first Steven Seagal movie, Above the Law, where that bar fight occurs in the first few minutes of the film. And it changed the world of martial arts. Suddenly, Chuck Norris and what's his name, Claude Van Damme, were not cool anymore. And he just did basically Aikijitsu. I know they call it Aikido, but at any rate, so you got a guy who saw that, and then he's driving down the street and he says, "I've got to do that. There's a Taekwondo school," and he turns in and signs up. Wrong mission, wrong deal. It's it's just different. And so, asking the who, what, where, when, how, and why questions, and figuring out what you want to learn, that's a big deal. And it was always a big tragedy in my life is getting immersed into systems that really wasn't what I wanted to do. I had this curse in my first real JKD instructor that changed my life. The guy who went to California, his name is Ray Medina, and we were tight, and we were, working out all the time and everything. And we would go to any and every seminar possible, but we just had a different mindset. The question was, how do I defeat this? So we're learning something, and I'm thinking, okay, if I did that to somebody, what could he do back to me? And if someone did that to me, how do I get out of it? So that's my first question, and that evaluates the value of the movement, and you try to fit it in. Well, I could do that against a drunk or whatever, you try to fit it in. So this has been a curse of mine. Ray is dead now, but we had this in common, but we still did everything. We still did all the drills and exercise, and just be the skeptic. I'm an eternal skeptic. I'm such a skeptic. I'm skeptical of my skepticism. And be the martial skeptic. What's your martial IQ? And try to think about these things. And like they say, there's no question that's too stupid. It's just the impatience of the instructor who just doesn't want to answer them. I had a deal the other day where I was talking about punching, which I'm still a puncher, but low. I want to punch the bicycle helmet area of the head. And so I said, Larry Hartzell used to say, hit and dent, and so don't just hit the surface, but dent it, and then try not to overpass it, which happens in real life, but just try not to. And so one new guy in the seminar says, well, what about, power punching and progressing through the punch for that? And I just said, okay, how far do you want to go? What is the economical, smart thing to do? Expose yourself, to an overpunch, or hit dent, which was a great learning term that Hartzell used that one time. Dent the car, dent the material, and then extract it back to the integrity of your original position, And so the question, you've probably, unfortunately, you hear questions like that constantly, but they're certainly worth answering because it's a skeptic. You've got a skeptic there, the what if guy. And what is one of the who, what, where, when, how, and whys,
Exactly. So what advice do you have for anybody who's, currently training martial arts and wants to now, branch into the law enforcement area, or just somebody who has no martial training, but somebody who just wants to get into the law enforcement? What advice would you give somebody who's trying to get into that field?
Very tough. And it's been tough for me my whole life because of quotas. In the 70s, I couldn't get hired in major police departments. And they just told me flat out, well, we're looking for, minorities. And today, more than ever, they are. I have two wonderful friends. Do you know Sean Zerger up there in California? Yeah. Is there a better guy on the planet than this guy?
Yeah, he's a great guy. Great martial artist.
He would be the consummate cop. And he's, he's investigating, trying to get into police work. And it's not going to be easy for him. And it hasn't been because they want, minorities. And so I have another great friend in England who's a wonderful human being, a terrific guy, and he's in martial arts and he's just a stable character, but he too is going to have that problem. So you have to persevere through that problem. Mm-hmm. It just depends on who you are and your background and whatever the heck the local thing is going to be. The local police department, what are they looking for? You contact the recruiting office and say, hey, realistically, what's going on? Can I get in? You have to try. And what are my odds and so on.
And how do you find the level of training for law enforcement? Well, we'll talk about the U.S. because you live in the U.S., but what do you feel that the standard is for training for law enforcement? Do you think it's up to par? Do you think it's something that needs to be revamped? Do you think it should be a level of jiu-jitsu they need to have or acquire in order for them to do their job? How do you feel about that whole training regime?
Well, it's terrible. I don't think much of it. It's because it's so sporadic. And like I said, when I first talked to these people that want the training, I've trained the special operations police in Belgium, the counterterrorism units in Belgium, the special operations people in Italy. I used to teach all the time at the British Police Academy, not rookies, but uh, um, you know. Veteran schools, that you go to, and it's not enough, and it's not periodic enough. And it's the same thing with shooting to really get it happening. Now, I'm like one of the minority cops who continued to work out while working as a cop, and you love to see those guys. But I would also prefer that they do a hand, stick, knife, gun combatives program, which they're not going to like that word, by the way, than just jujitsu. Because wrestling around, and then you have to have. I think if a guy's done jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu for 26 years, he's going to kill everybody, but not kill them, but stop everybody. But there's knives now, there's pistols now, there's people now. I myself was hospitalized in a giant fight we were trying to break up, where all of us hit the ground in a basement. It was a big college party, and then I was unconscious for 20 minutes. When they slapped me awake, they told me that a guy in a crab walk kicked me, crab walked up to me and thrust kicked me in the head in a ground kick, and I was unconscious. I had a concussion. I was hospitalized, and this is the lack of just kicking on the ground in these positions. When you do a shrimp in the sport mentality, you want to keep the person close because you want to continue pretzel fighting. You want to continue it. But if you're a survivalist, you shrimp and pitch the guy off in hopefully a distance to where you could kick him in the stomach or kick him in the head. See, that's a different thing right there.
Yes.
You get all these things in your muscle memory, and it kind of becomes a problem. So you need mission-specific training, for what you expect to be doing, And so I would much prefer that they have a police course. And a lot of these departments are now creating their own programs and not running to these established ones, And the lawyers are involved and the management's involved, and, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's a very tricky business. But the first thing you have to do is apply. Talk to the recruiter, see what's going on, and then put in the application and, just see what happens. I couldn't get hired. Then I went in the Army. I did all this stuff, got out, still really didn't easily get hired, but I was a wanted person by the police because I had all this training and experience. And so the Army, military police, was the key to me to shoot off into the civilian world.
Wow. So, okay, so we look at it from a point where the police department is not possibly offering the certain type of training that you need. It's also on the officer as well. Like, you find that there's a lack of wanting to train from certain law enforcement, even if it's on their own dime, going to the gym and training martial arts or training something that's because for me, if I were doing that job every day, I would want to make sure if I'm risking my life every day, I want to make sure that I have a say in the gamble,
Oh yes, absolutely. And and there are people out of shape, overweight, etc. As I used to say, by the grace of God, continue to do this job, And I did a seminar in one city. I experimented, and I just said, police, 2 days, $15. Everybody else is paying $150, $175 for 2 days. But if you're active law enforcement, it's $15. And I actually got several responses to that, trying to get their police agency to pay the $15. And so this is the world that is. And then, you go to another seminar and there's a bunch of cops. I was in Belgium one year and a whole crew of Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies showed up. I said, what? I'm in LA. I teach in LA. They said, yeah, where's the fun in that? We're in Belgium now, But they paid on their dime to go all the way over there. So you never know who's going to show up at these things from wherever they come from.
Who would you say was the most influence of person who influenced you the most in your martial arts journey?
I would have to cut that into quarters or tenths, you know.
However you like.
The philosophies of Bruce Lee, if you really follow them, you know, it's going to not take you down these martial art paths, for one thing. And of course, so that was a big deal. And then, of course, the Inosanto family system, the concept of what they were doing and trying to do, was a big, exciting influence for me. But you know, you still cleaved it off. It was Thai boxing and so and so. The blend was not really evident. You had to change clothes sometimes. I've been in these classes, but taking private lessons at different instructors around the country, and you'd go to the classes at night before of them. Well, first was JKD, and you wore your little shorts and the tank top back then, and then the next one was Thai boxing. You had to run in the room where those clothes come out. And then the next one, you know, and it was like a psychological, a subliminal breaking up of systems where I was interested in the blend, you know. Can the Thai guy fight the mano guy well? Can all these different things. I think the Filipino material is fantastic, and the basis for, and the connected basics for everything, especially the way that Ernesto Presas taught mano. And Kajikembo is a tremendous blend. And I was into this a blend very much. So the Presas brothers, Ernesto, his obsession with trying to make things better all the time, make the system smarter, constantly changing it to the dismay of us. But he was obsessed with improvements. Ben Mangles, the South African commando, he's dead now. He moved to the U.S. He had a great mental influence on me. And he'd been in a lot of wars, a lot of conflict, some of them quite horrible. And he wore those scars. But he was also a big influence on me. And once again, you know, I saw him a lot in seminars. I tried to take his classes. They were far away. It was jiu-jitsu in a uniform, old school jiu-jitsu, stand-up Japanese style. You hit the guy, you threw him down. You may wrangled with him a little bit, but if you got too much wrangling, it was judo. That's the old perimeters from the old days. And everyone, and of course, the guy I mentioned that went to California, Ray Medina, he, you know, was my Bruce Lee. I was Dan. We had privates every week, and I would just say, Ray, what are we doing today? And basically is whatever he wanted to do, and he beat me up. You know, I was paying good money for it, but he basically was experimenting in his own way. And after the years, it's always good to be the stunt man in a seminar, which I was forever, because you got the beat, you got the feel, you know, like that. And so there's a number of people. I can't just put one up top. There's a number of people that were invaluable to my martial IQ.
Fair enough. But for you personally, what is your impact? What is your stamp on the arts that you want to be remembered for leaving in the industry?
Well, in a world of embrace the suck and skepticism, I suspect I will leave almost nothing. I suspect that my videos are all available for download. And, you know, so they will perpetuate themselves. I've written to me, I wouldn't have done it unless I could, the best knife book you'll ever find anywhere. And I have a stick book, an impact weapons book, that is strictly self-defense. You're not going to be down here on Johnson Street and fight somebody with your 28-inch stick, and coincidentally, he has a 28-inch stick. You know, that is a Filipino hobby and sport and lots of fun. But there's a stick world where it's stick versus unarmed. Yes, stick versus stick versus knife, stick versus some gun threats. That's another 10 commandments I use in all the courses. Hand versus hand versus stick, hand versus knife, hand versus gun threats. You lay out these mantras and then you prepare, you know, your system to be thorough. So I suspect that my training mission series, my knife book, my stick book will live on past me. However, I've seen these other systems come and go. When the people die, they dissolve, they argue. I'm not going to have any of that. There's no appointed replacement. I'm here to make you grow. You're supposed to be the next king. You're supposed to take over, and I'm just a stepping stone, a vessel for a person's growth. And so, the skeptic in me says that, what is it? What is it? The expression, rumors of my success are greatly exaggerated.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm going to wrap this up, but I just want to say thank you very much for your contribution and your service. Thank you for the knowledge that you've shared. And I appreciate all the research and time you've put in for it in order for the art to grow and for everybody else to grow. And I look forward to training with you in the future. Hopefully, if this COVID thing gives us a break long enough for us to get at it. If you have any last thoughts you want to just put out there for the listener, please do so.
Well, just evaluate everything. Be skeptical and evaluate everything through the who, what, where, when, how, and why.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming, listening to the Parley.